everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, good. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the power of language within a world that's in flux. So I wanted to start out by throwing this name up on the screen. No cheating if you know how to pronounce this, but could you just shout out, how would you pronounce this name upon reading it?
Ciara!
Yeah, so Ciara is the most common pronunciation of my name. Hi, my name is Malaugh. And I was born to an immigrant family in northern Alabama, a family that escaped religious violence within Northern Ireland, a family that went through a series of really difficult economic hardships, a family that moved to America for a better life. And they gifted me with one of the most Gaelic names that exists that is incredibly difficult for people to pronounce, especially upon reading it. And this is something that ended up creating a lot of stressful situations in my life, particularly within roll call growing up, because my teacher would never be able to pronounce my name. And at 3 and 4 and 5 years old, I had to build up the courage to correct my teachers, only to have them mispronounce my name back to me anyway. My classmates would all laugh and giggle about this, and they would come up to me after and say, "Why do you have such a weird name?" And I tell them, well, I'm from Ireland, it's a super Irish name. And they would all make fun of me for being too foreign, for not being American. And so from a young age, I was taught that I was an outsider. This has actually had such an impact on my life to the point where when people ask me where I'm from today, it's a really heavy question. I don't know what to answer. Am I American? Am I Irish? Where am I from? And I share this as a personal example of the power that language has within our daily lives. So, oh yeah, it's also, there's a pronunciation key to my name as my bio on Facebook. So I'm going to give a quick roadmap about what I'll be talking about today, because we're covering a lot of topics. So first, I'm going to start talking about the power dynamics of linguistics within our daily lives. And then I'll be talking about climate change and migration and the way that language interacts with this. And then finally, I'll be ending with an action piece. What can we do? So, power dynamics of language. This is basically a crash course in sociolinguistics. So this is Cher from the movie Clueless. Cher is a really famous California Valley girl, and she has a tendency to end her sentences like this, even when it's a statement and not a question. This is a phenomenon that's known as upspeak, and it's particularly common within women. And it was actually developed as a defense mechanism, because whenever women end their sentences in a declaratory way like this, people would interrupt them, and they wouldn't be able to finish their thought. And so it was found that when they ended their sentences like this, they could continue saying what they were saying. Unfortunately, this is something that has been used to paint women as being less intelligent, as unprofessional, as a little vapid, both within popular media and how people interact with women in our daily lives. A more consequential example of the power of language within our daily lives is how language interacts with race. There was a study at Stanford that showed that if a black person on a witness stand speaks African American vernacular English, they are significantly less likely to be taken as a credible witness, which has real impacts on our criminal justice system that is already burdened with institutional racism. Another example that might hit close to home for a lot of people within the room here is the way that Southern accents are perceived. So we see pretty frequently in movies that the character who's supposed to be the clown, the stupid character, has a Southern accent. And that's because a lot of people associate Southern accents with lower levels of intelligence and lower levels of education. This is actually something, sorry parents, that it's a perception my parents have. And so when I dropped my Northern Irish accent as a kid, they fought really hard to make sure that I didn't get this Alabama Southern accent. Everybody in my family hates that I still say y'all. And so the power of language goes beyond just how we speak language, but the actual languages that we speak itself. So I talked about roll call earlier, and roll call being a stressful situation for me because my name's in Gaelic. This is actually a documented phenomenon of roll call being really anxiety-inducing for children of immigrants. And it actually affects children of immigrants so much to where sometimes they just won't respond whenever their name is called, because it's really annoying and it's really frustrating to have your name continually mispronounced. And so children of immigrants will be marked as absent even when they're present in class. And this ends up having an effect on their success within schools. It's been shown that children of immigrants are 3 times more likely to drop out of school than the average American white student. That's pretty significant. Furthermore, language is just really important to our perceptions of ourselves and the ways that we form our identity. The way that we talk about ourselves and express ourselves and make community with people and build culture with people is through the actual languages that we speak. And so it's really important within our daily lives. So now I'm going to move on to talk about climate change and migration and how language interacts with this. So climate migration is a phenomenon in which people are displaced from their homes due to climate-related disasters. This can be immediate, so a really big flood comes through and your house is no longer habitable, or like a large hurricane that was very unexpected. It can also be gradual, a drought over a long period of time that makes it impossible to grow crops, to eat, thus to both make a living and be able to survive, to sustain yourself, and then a person has to move. And this is a very big and pertinent phenomenon that people don't hear about much, but I wanted to share some stats. So, within the past 7 years, there have been 157 million people who have been displaced by climate change. 14.7 million of those people were displaced within the past year. This is huge, and it's estimated that up to 1 billion people will be displaced by climate change by the end of the century. The areas that are affected by climate migration most tend to be in East and Southern Asia and the Pacific Ocean, and Latin America and the Caribbean. This is partially because these countries have lower GDPs, and so they don't have the money and thus the infrastructure to respond in the moment when there's a climate-related disaster. And so people have no choice but to move. If you see, there's only 7% of climate migration that's occurred in North America. So I want to go through some specific examples of climate migration and the way that that connects to language. So Tuvalu and Kiribati are 2 island nations within the Pacific Ocean that by the end of the century will be completely gone due to sea level rises if climate change patterns continue as they are right now, which they likely will because we currently have an administration that's denying climate change. And so, 1/5 of people in Tuvalu have already had to migrate. This is happening right now. Not as many people, but still a significant amount of people from Kiribati have also had to move. And they're moving to global north English-speaking countries, like Australia and New Zealand in particular. Right now, these countries are trying to figure out a way that they can get these citizens to get what is basically like climate refugee status. There isn't a legal framework for this in place yet. There's been 1 person from Tuvalu who has been granted this status, and nobody from Kiribati, and everybody else is living within these countries undocumented. This is partially because New Zealand and Australia don't really want these people to come to their country because they see them as a burden on the workforce because they don't speak English, they speak Tuvalu, and they speak Kiribati. And so because of this, people have had to spread out over the countries. They're not living with their communities, and they're actually not speaking their language on a daily basis because it is literally dangerous. If people see them speaking these languages, they could be deported to who knows where because their country doesn't exist anymore, or at least the land that they inhabited doesn't exist anymore. Another example is within the Middle East and North Africa. So Middle East and North Africa houses around 500 million people. It's a significant portion of the world's population. And if climate change patterns continue, as they will, then there are going to be some pretty significant effects on the climate of Middle East and North Africa. So temperatures within the summer are going to get up to around high 130, low 140 degrees not Celsius, oh that'd be impossible, Fahrenheit, which is still really, really hot. It's literally uninhabitable. People cannot live within that. Furthermore, those temperatures are going to occur at 5 times the rate that high temperatures do within the summer in the Middle East right now. In addition to this, because of increased air pollution, there are going to be some pretty significant desert storms that are going to increase both within intensity and frequency. So, if somebody's living in an area that hasn't been affected by this temperature change, chances are that there are going to be a lot of desert storms that are going to make home really difficult to inhabit. So there, unfortunately, will be a huge mass of migration from the Middle East and North Africa, up to 500 million people. People within the Middle East and North Africa tend to speak languages like Arabic, Persian, Urdu. These are languages that are already demonized within countries like the United States and Europe, which are the places that people will be moving to. People are literally kicked off of airplanes for speaking Arabic. This is significant. This means that when people have to leave their home, they're going to move to countries like ours, and they're going to have to drop their language and only speak English, even in order to survive, in order to avoid persecution and hate crimes. This isn't only an international phenomenon, however. Somewhere else that this occurs is home. So in Louisiana, there is a tribal nation that has lost 98% of their lands because they live in the Louisiana wetlands. The Louisiana wetlands are being affected by sea level rise. And so this is really changing the dynamic of Louisiana. If we look at Louisiana maps right now, they're really not that accurate. That boot has decreased significantly. There's only a 1.5 mile stretch left of their land. And it's affected both the ways that they are able to inhabit land, they're in a much smaller space, but also their food and their trade, because the majority of the trade was from fishing, and a lot of those populations, the fishing populations, have either died because of the changes in the composition of the wetlands, or they've migrated elsewhere. So they don't have their trade, and they don't have their food, and they're losing their land. Currently, they're working with the Louisiana government. They have a big grant to try and find another place to relocate, but it's hard, because if they relocate somewhere else within the Louisiana wetlands, 10 years from now, those lands will be gone. They're trying to find other places in Louisiana, but there really isn't a mass of land that can hold everybody that isn't already inhabited. So, chances are, because there's a lot of bureaucracy and this isn't being addressed immediately, it needs to be addressed immediately because their land is about to be gone by the end of the decade, that the tribe's going to have to disperse and that people aren't going to be able to live together. And so they're going to have to move all around Louisiana. This tribe speaks Cajun French. They're going to have to move within Louisiana and learn a new trade because they can no longer fish in the wetlands and interact with communities that aren't their own. And they're probably going to have to speak English every day. And when they're losing their community, they're losing their connection to each other, and then they're losing their language. And we see within all these examples that people, in order to survive within this era of climate migration, are going to have to drop their language, one of their last connections to their identity in the face of land loss, in order to be able to exist. And this is really sad. There are other areas within the United States that are being affected by climate migration too. My favorite city, or one of my favorite cities, Miami, because of its proximity to the ocean, will be underwater. So will New York City. Dana Sweeney, who introduced me, is from rural coastal Georgia, and he has shared with me about how his home, by the end of the century, will be underwater. So there are a lot of places within the United States that are being affected by this too. Bottom line. So we see that the cultural fabric of our world is about to change, because up to 1 billion people are going to have to leave their homes and move to nations like ours. Because of the power dynamics that are inherent within language, they're probably going to have to drop their languages and learn ours, thus losing their culture and their identity when they've already lost their land. And that's a lot that's happening. But we can resist this. What I prescribe to you all, to all of us, is that we start seeing language beyond utility, and we start seeing it as a tool to build community. And what I mean by this is we don't only learn French and Mandarin because they're great international business languages, or Russian because we want to work in national security, but we start learning languages like Tuvalu, and we start learning languages like Kiribati and Bengali. I don't expect everybody to be able to become fluent within these languages overnight, or even at all. But when we start learning these languages, we create the space for languages other than English to exist and thrive within our nation, thus creating the space for people to be able to continue to have their culture and their community and their identity, even in the face of losing their land. So, if we start learning languages, we can build community with people beyond the barriers of our linguistic identity. and be an agent of change within a world that's in flux due to climate change. That's all I have. Thank you for coming out.